I always thought our life was a painting, vibrant and carefully composed. Emily and I had been married for 12 years. Our home in Portland a canvas of shared dreams. Bookshelves lined with her poetry collections and my history tomes. A garden where we'd spend Sundays arguing over which herbs to plant. She was the spark, the one who'd dance barefoot in the kitchen to jazz records, pulling me into her orbit. I was the steady hand, the one who'd balance her wild ideas with pragmatism. We weren't perfect, but we were us, and that felt like enough. Or so I believed. It was late September when I first noticed the shift, subtle as a shadow moving across a wall. Emily started staying late at the university where she taught creative writing. Workshops, she'd say, her voice light but her eyes darting away. I didn't press her. I trusted her. She'd always been the one to chase inspiration, to lose herself in late-night scribbles or debates with her students. I was busy too, buried in my research at the museum, cataloging artifacts from a recent dig in Turkey. Our schedules had diverged before. It was normal, I told myself. But then came the phone. A new one, separate from the one we both knew, tucked in her coat pocket. I found it by accident while looking for my keys. The screen lit up with a notification. A name I didn't recognize. Elliot. No message preview, just the name, glowing like a warning. My stomach twisted, but I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I watched. Her laughter seemed sharper now, her touches less frequent. She'd linger in the bathroom, the faint tap of thumbs on a screen echoing through the door. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was imagining it. Doubt is a slow poison. It creeps in, unnoticed, until it's all you taste. I started checking her usual phone when she slept, hating myself for it. Nothing. No texts, no calls, just mundane chats with colleagues and her sister. The absence of evidence only deepened my unease. I'd sit at my desk, surrounded by ancient relics, and feel like one myself, discarded, waiting to be deciphered. Emily was still there, still smiling, still kissing me goodnight, but it was like she was performing. I began to catalog her behaviors like I did my artifacts. The way she'd tilt her head when I asked about her day, the extra second it took her to answer. Each detail was a shard, sharp and incomplete. I didn't want to believe it. Emily was my constant, the one who'd held my hand when my father passed, who'd laughed with me over cheap wine on our honeymoon. But the signs were piling up, a mosaic I couldn't unsee. I started waking earlier, driving by the university before work, scanning the parking lot for her car. Once, I saw her walking with a man, tall, bearded, gesturing animatedly. They didn't touch, but their ease stabbed me. I didn't know his name yet, but I knew he was Elliot. I drove away, my hands shaking on the wheel, telling myself it could be innocent. It had to be. By October, I was unraveling. I'd always prided myself on logic, on seeing patterns others missed, but this pattern was breaking me. I'd catch myself staring at her across the dinner table, searching for the woman I married. She'd talk about her students, her voice warm, but her eyes were elsewhere. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but fear held me back. What if I was wrong? What if I was right? I started keeping a journal, noting every discrepancy, every late night. It was my way of holding on to sanity, of proving I wasn't losing my mind. But each entry felt like a step toward a truth I wasn't ready to face. The air in our house grew heavy, like it was holding its breath. I'd walk past her office, see her typing furiously, and wonder who she was writing to. I'd smell her perfume, jasmine, always jasmine, and feel both love and rage. I wasn't sleeping anymore, not really. I'd lie beside her, listening to her breathe, and think about how easy it would be to ask. But I didn't. Not yet. I needed proof, something undeniable. Because once I knew, there'd be no going back. The museum became my refuge, a place where I could lose myself in the past to escape the present. I'd spend hours handling clay tablets, their cuneiform etchings a language I could decode. Unlike the silence growing between Emily and me, I'd always been good at puzzles, at finding meaning in fragments, but this puzzle was different. It was personal, and every piece I uncovered cut deeper. By mid-October, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I needed to know who Elliot was, what he meant to her. I needed to know why she changed. I started small, almost casually. I'd ask about her day, probing gently, "Anyone interesting in your class?" She'd shrug, mention a student's poem or a colleague's rant, but never Elliot. Her deflections were artful, seamless, and that scared me more than a lie would have. I began tracking her schedule, cross-referencing her late nights with university events. Most didn't match. One evening, she said she was moderating a poetry reading, but when I checked the department's website, there was nothing listed. I sat in my car outside our house, staring at the lights in her office window, wondering where she really was. I hated what I was becoming, a spy in my own marriage. But the alternative was worse, ignorance. I started following her discreetly at first. I'd leave work early, park near the university, and wait. Sometimes she'd emerge alone, her bag slung over her shoulder, heading straight home. Other times, she'd meet him, Elliot. I learned his face before I learned his full name, Elliot Harper, a visiting lecturer in the English department. They'd walk together, their steps too close, their laughter too intimate. I'd grip the steering wheel until my knuckles ached, watching them disappear into a coffee shop or linger by his car. I found his profile online, a mistake I regretted instantly. He was everything I wasn't, charismatic, with a published novel and a TED Talk on storytelling. His bio mentioned a divorce, a detail that felt like a punch. I imagined them together, her reading his manuscript, him praising her poems. I imagined worse. The images haunted me, vivid and relentless, but I still had no proof. No texts, no emails, just their proximity and my gut screaming betrayal. I started carrying her second phone's existence like a stone in my pocket, too afraid to touch it again, too obsessed to forget it. One night I cracked. She was asleep, her breathing soft, and I slipped out of bed. I found the phone in her purse, hidden in a side pocket. My hands shook as I powered it on. The lock screen asked for a code. I tried her birthday, our anniversary, nothing. I stood there, staring at the glowing screen, feeling like a thief. I put it back, but not before noticing a new notification. Tomorrow, same place. No context, no details, just enough to confirm what I already knew. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, the dark pressing in, and planned my next move. I started documenting everything. Photos of her car at odd hours, screenshots of Elliot's schedule, notes on their meetings. I bought a small recorder, slipping it into my briefcase, though I hadn't used it yet. I told myself it was for clarity, for truth, but part of me knew it was for revenge. Not yet, not fully formed, but the seed was there. I'd catch myself fantasizing about confronting them, imagining their faces when I revealed what I knew. It was a dangerous comfort, one that kept me sane while tearing me apart. Emily noticed my distance, though she didn't say it outright. She'd ask if I was okay, her voice tinged with something. Guilt? Concern? I'd nod, force a smile, and change the subject. I couldn't let her see how much I knew, not until I was ready. I started working late too, mirroring her excuses, testing her reactions. She didn't flinch, didn't question me. That hurt more than I expected. It was like she'd already let me go, like I was a ghost in our own home. I'd walk through our garden, see her rosemary thriving, and feel the ground shifting beneath me. November arrived, cold and gray, mirroring the chill in our house. I was living two lives. The husband who smiled and cooked dinner, and the man who tracked his wife's every move. The recorder finally came out of my briefcase. I hid it in her car one morning, tucked under the passenger seat. It felt like crossing a line, but I was too far gone to care. That evening, she said she was meeting a colleague for drinks to discuss a grant. I nodded, kissed her cheek, and watched her leave. Then I waited. The recording was patchy, filled with road noise and her humming jazz, always jazz. But then his voice came through, low and familiar, though I couldn't make out the words at first. They were in a cafe, the clink of cups faint but clear. I listened, my heart pounding, as their conversation turned personal. "You deserve more," he said, and she laughed, soft and bitter. "Maybe," she replied. They talked about her poetry, about freedom, about things she'd never shared with me. Not anymore. There was a pause, then the sound of a chair scraping, and her voice, closer now. "I shouldn't, but I want to." The recording cut off after that, the battery dead. Played it again, and again. Each time her words carved deeper. "I shouldn't, but I want to." It wasn't proof of a physical affair. Not yet, but it was enough to shatter the last of my denial. I sat in my study, the recorder in my hand, and felt something harden inside me. Love was still there, tangled with pain, but now there was something else. Rage, cold and precise. I didn't want to just confront her. I wanted her to feel what I felt. I wanted Elliot to feel it too. I started digging deeper, no longer cautious. I hacked into her university email, not hard, since she used the same password for everything. There, Buried in a folder labeled drafts were messages she'd never sent, raw and unfiltered. "Elliot, you make me feel alive again," one began. Another, "I'm scared of what this means, but I can't stop." They weren't explicit, but they were intimate, a window into her heart. She hadn't sent them, but she'd written them, and that was enough. I printed them out, kept them in a locked drawer at work. Evidence, I told myself, though I wasn't sure for what. I followed them again, this time to a bookstore downtown. They sat in the cafe upstairs, sharing a table littered with books. I watched from across the street, hidden by the dusk. She leaned toward him, her hand brushing his as she pointed to a page. He smiled, and I saw it, the way he looked at her like she was his. I wanted to storm in, to upend their table, but I didn't. Instead, I took photos, my phone trembling in my hands. Each click felt like a vow. They'd pay for this. At home, I was a stranger. Emily tried to bridge the gap, suggesting a weekend away, but I couldn't stomach it. I'd look at her, see her with him, and feel my jaw tighten. She sensed it, I know she did. One night, she touched my arm and asked, "What's wrong?" "Really?" I almost told her. The words were there, sharp and ready, but I swallowed them. "Just work," I said, and she nodded, though her eyes lingered. I wondered if she was relieved, if she wanted me to stay blind. That thought fueled me, pushed me to plan. I started researching Elliot beyond his public persona. Social media, old articles, anything I could find. He had a sister in Seattle, a mother in hospice, a pattern of short-lived relationships. I noted it all, building a profile like I would for an artifact. I didn't know how I'd use it yet, but knowledge was power, and I was starving for it. I'd lie awake, imagining ways to unravel him. His career, his reputation, his life. And Emily? I didn't know what I wanted from her. Not forgiveness, not yet. Maybe not ever. But I wanted her to see what she'd done, to feel its weight. By December, I was a man possessed, though I hid it well. Colleagues at the museum commented on my focus, mistaking obsession for dedication. I'd nod, smile, then retreat to my office to pore over my notes. The drawer held more now. The printed emails, the photos, a log of her movements. I'd added the recorder's transcript, her voice captured in fragments I couldn't erase. I shouldn't, but I want to. Played in my head like a mantra driving me forward. I wasn't just gathering evidence anymore. I was building a weapon. I decided to start with Elliot. He was the easier target, the outsider in our story. I'd learned he was ambitious, chasing a tenure-track position at the university. His novel had sold modestly, but he leaned hard on his charm, his lectures packed with students hanging on his every word. I saw him as a fraud, a man who thrived on attention, who'd seen Emily's vulnerability and exploited it. I wanted to strip that away, to leave him exposed. I began with his professional life. Universities are fragile ecosystems, built on reputation and trust. I created an anonymous email account and sent a tip to the department chair, vague but pointed, concerns about inappropriate conduct between a visiting lecturer and a colleague. I didn't name Emily. I wasn't ready to drag her into it yet, but I mentioned Elliot's late-night meetings, his unprofessional demeanor. I attached a photo, carefully cropped, showing him leaning too close to her at the bookstore. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to plant a seed. I waited, watching for ripples. A week later, I overheard Emily on the phone, her voice tight. "They're auditing his classes," she said to someone, her sister, maybe. "It's ridiculous." I kept my face neutral, stirring pasta in the kitchen, but inside I was electric. It was working. I sent another email, this time to a campus gossip blog, dropping hints about a rising star lecturer with a wandering eye. I didn't expect it to go viral, but it spread enough to make him sweat. I saw it in his face when I followed him to a faculty event. His smile strained as colleagues whispered. Emily was harder. I couldn't bring myself to hurt her directly. Not yet, but I needed her to feel the consequences. I started small, subtle. I'd forget to pass on messages from her friends, leaving her to wonder why they hadn't called. I'd rearrange her office when she was out, moving her notebooks, her pens, just enough to unsettle her. She'd frown, ask if I'd been in there, and I'd shrug, blame it on cleaning. It was petty, but it felt good to see her off balance, to mirror the chaos she'd brought into my life. I kept following them, though their meetings grew less frequent. Once, I saw them argue outside a bar, her arms crossed, his hands raised. I couldn't hear the words, but her face, angry, then soft, told me enough. She still cared about him. That hurt more than I expected, but it also clarified things. I wasn't just dismantling their affair. I was dismantling them. I started researching legal options, not divorce, not yet, but ways to protect myself. I moved money into a separate account, small amounts she wouldn't notice. I cataloged our assets, our shared life, preparing for a reckoning I hadn't named. At home, the tension was palpable. Emily was distracted, snapping over small things, like when I left dishes in the sink. I'd apologize, play the dutiful husband, but I was watching, always watching. She'd stopped hiding the second phone as carefully, leaving it in her bag like she was daring me to find it. I didn't touch it again, I didn't need to. I had enough. But I wondered if she wanted me to know, if she was tired of the lie. That thought kept me up, made me question everything. Was she sorry? Did it matter? I was changing, and not for the better. Friends noticed, asked if I was okay. I'd laugh it off, say work was intense, but the truth was darker. I was becoming someone who thrived on control, who found satisfaction in their discomfort. I'd look at Emily, see the woman I loved, and feel a stranger staring back. I didn't know how far I'd go, but I knew I wasn't stopping. Not until they both understood what they'd done. Christmas loomed, but our house felt like a stage set, all props and no warmth. Emily hung lights, baked cookies, but her heart wasn't in it. I played along, stringing garland, buying her a scarf she'd never wear. We were actors, reciting lines from a life we'd lost. I'd catch her staring out the window, her face unreadable, and wonder if she was thinking of him. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. The truth was in her silences, her hurried smiles, the way she'd pull away when I touched her. Elliot's world was fraying, and I was the unseen thread pulling it apart. The university had extended his audit, thanks to my emails. I'd sent a third, this time to a dean, alleging he'd plagiarized a lecture slide. A half-truth I'd pieced together from old conference notes online. It wasn't airtight, but it was enough to keep him scrambling. I'd hacked into his public social media, easy enough with a phishing link sent from a fake student account. I didn't post anything too risky, but I read his messages, saw his panic. "They're out to get me," he wrote to a friend. I smiled, alone in my study, and kept digging. I turned my attention to his personal life. His sister in Seattle was a weak point. She posted too much, photos of family dinners, her kids, him. I created another anonymous account, this time on a community forum she frequented. I dropped hints about her brother's troubling behavior, vague enough to avoid a lawsuit, sharp enough to sting. She replied, defensive, but I saw the doubt in her words. I sent her a private message, attaching a photo of Elliot and Emily at the cafe, their hands almost touching. "Ask him about her," I wrote. I didn't expect a response, but I knew it would haunt her. Emily was unraveling too, though she hid it better. She'd stopped mentioning Elliot, but I saw him in her eyes, in the way she'd check her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. I upped my game at home, becoming unpredictable. I'd cancel plans last minute, leave notes saying I'd be late, then come home early to watch her jump when I walked in. I'd move her second phone not far, just to a different pocket, then ask innocently if she'd misplaced something. Her frustration was palpable, a mirror to my own, and I fed on it. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. I needed more leverage, something undeniable. I hired a private investigator, a quiet man named Carl who didn't ask questions. I gave him everything, photos, schedules, the recorder's transcript. "I just need the truth," I told him, and he nodded, his eyes unreadable. A week later, he sent me a report, dates, times, locations. They'd met at a motel once 2 weeks ago. No photos inside, but Carl had shots of them entering, leaving an hour later. Her hair was mussed, his shirt untucked. I stared at the images, my vision blurring, and felt the last piece of my heart break. That night, I planned the first real strike. Not confrontation, not yet, but something to shake them both. I waited until Emily was asleep, then used her second phone. I'd cracked the code weeks ago, her mother's birthday, a detail she'd forgotten I knew. I sent Elliot a text. "We need to stop. He's suspicious." I watched the screen, my pulse racing, until his reply came, "I know. Let's talk tomorrow." I deleted the exchange, powered off the phone, and slipped it back into her bag. It was small, but it would plant doubt, make them question each other. The next day, Emily was quiet, her eyes red. I asked if she was okay, my voice gentle, and she nodded, too quickly. I knew she'd seen him, knew they'd argued. I felt no joy, only a cold satisfaction. I was rewriting their story, turning their connection into a trap. I didn't know how far I'd go, but I knew I wasn't done. They'd taken my life, my love, my trust. Now I'd take theirs, piece by piece until nothing was left. Winter settled over Portland like a shroud, and I felt its weight in my bones. The house was quieter now, the pretense of normalcy thinning with each passing day. Emily moved through our routines like a ghost, her smiles brittle, her touches fleeting. I catch her staring at me sometimes, searching for something. Guilt, maybe, or a sign I knew. I gave her nothing. My face was a mask, honed over weeks of deception, and behind it, I was weaving a web neither she nor Elliot could escape. Carl, the investigator, became my shadow ally. His reports grew thicker, detailing their meetings with clinical precision. They'd stopped using the motel. Too risky, I guessed. But they still met in parks, quiet bars, once in his car during a rainstorm. Carl's photos captured moments I couldn't unsee. Her hand on his arm, his head tilted toward her like she was his world. I kept the photos in my office, locked away with the emails and recordings, a growing archive of their betrayal. Each image fueled me, sharpened my resolve. I escalated with Elliot first. His career was already wobbling. The university's audit had him teaching fewer classes, his confidence visibly shaken. I dug deeper, targeting his network. He'd been invited to a literary festival in San Francisco, a chance to rebuild his reputation. I couldn't let that happen. Using another anonymous account, I contacted the organizers, posing as a concerned colleague. I sent them a doctored screenshot of a review claiming Elliot had lifted passages from an obscure poet. It was a lie, but a convincing one, backed by enough detail to raise questions. 2 days later, his name vanished from the festival's website. I didn't celebrate, but I felt the scales tip slightly in my favor. At home, I played a different game. Emily was fraying, her composure cracking under the strain of her double life and my subtle sabotage. I'd started leaving clues, nothing overt, just enough to keep her off balance. A receipt from a cafe she'd visited with Elliot slipped into her coat pocket. A book he'd mentioned in one of her unsent emails, placed on her desk with a bookmark at a random page. She'd pause when she found them, her breath catching, then glance at me as if expecting an accusation. I'd smile, ask about her day, and watch her squirm. It was cruel, I knew, but it felt like justice. I began to isolate her slowly, surgically. I'd mishear invitations to her friends' events, ensuring we missed them. I'd call her sister when I knew Emily was out, planting vague worries about her stress that would filter back. Her world was shrinking, and she didn't even see my hand in it. One night, she came home late, her eyes puffy, and said she'd had a fight with a colleague. I nodded, offered tea, but inside I was certain it was Elliot. The text I'd sent from her phone had done its job, sowing distrust. I wondered what they'd said, how deep the fracture ran. Carl brought me something new. Audio from a bug he'd placed in Elliot's car. It was legal, he assured me, as long as it was on public property. I listened alone in my study, the rain drumming outside. Their voices were tense, clipped. "You said he doesn't know," Elliot snapped. "He doesn't," Emily insisted, but her voice wavered. They argued about stopping, about risks, about feelings I didn't want to hear. "I love you," she whispered, and the words hit me like a blade. I stopped the recording, my hands shaking, and sat in the dark, letting the pain harden into purpose. I wasn't sleeping anymore, not really. I'd lie beside her, her warmth a mockery, and plan. My journal was a map now, not just of their actions but of my retaliation. I sketched scenarios, public humiliation, financial ruin, even legal traps. I didn't know which I'd choose, but the act of planning kept me sane. I looked at Emily, saw the woman I'd vowed to love, and felt a stranger staring back. She'd chosen him, chosen this, and I'd make sure she regretted it. Not just her, both of them. January brought snow, rare for Portland, and with it a strange clarity. I was no longer the man who'd stood at the altar with Emily, promising forever. That man was gone, replaced by someone colder, sharper, driven by a hunger for retribution. I didn't recognize myself in the mirror anymore. My eyes were hollow, my jaw tight, but I didn't care. This was who I needed to be to survive what they'd done. The photos, the recordings, the emails, they weren't just evidence now. They were my armor, my weapons. Elliot was crumbling faster than I'd expected. The festival cancellation had spooked him, and whispers about his ethics were spreading. I'd sent another anonymous tip, this time to a literary journal he'd pitched to, hinting at unreliable sources in his work. They dropped his piece and I saw the fallout online. His posts grew sparse, his tone defensive. I wanted more. I found his mother's hospice care details through his sister's careless posts and sent a letter, unsigned, suggesting he was neglecting her. It was a low blow, but I was past morality. I wanted him to feel hunted, cornered like I did. Emily sensed the shift in me, though she couldn't name it. She'd try to talk, her voice soft, asking about my work, our future. I'd answer in monosyllables, my attention elsewhere. Once, she reached for my hand, and I pulled away without thinking. Her face fell, and for a moment, I saw the old Emily, vulnerable, searching. It stirred something in me, a flicker of doubt, but I smothered it. She wasn't mine anymore. She'd given herself to him, and that truth burned away any softness I had left. I doubled down on the mind games. I'd leave my journal out, open to a blank page, knowing she'd look. She did once when she thought I was showering. I watched from the hallway, saw her flip through it, her hands trembling. There was nothing incriminating, just notes on artifacts, but the act itself rattled her. I started humming tunes she associated with Elliot, ones I'd overheard on the recordings, and watched her freeze. "Where'd you hear that?" she asked once, her voice sharp. I shrugged, said I didn't know, and changed the subject. Her paranoia was my victory, small but sharp. Carl's latest report confirmed they were pulling apart. Their meetings were brief now, tense, often ending in silence. He'd caught a snippet of Elliot saying, "This isn't worth it," and her replying, "You don't mean that." But he did. I could hear it in his voice. I'd broken their rhythm, turned their escape into a cage. I sent another text from her phone one night. I told him everything. No response came, but I knew it landed. The next day, she was a wreck, snapping at me over breakfast, her hands unsteady. I acted oblivious, poured her coffee, and watched her unravel. I started preparing for the endgame, though I hadn't decided what it would be. I met with a lawyer discreetly to discuss options, divorce, assets, even defamation if I could pin something on Elliot. I didn't commit, but I wanted the framework ready. I moved more money, sold some stocks, and rented a storage unit for my personal effects. Books, photos, things I couldn't lose if it came to that. I was methodical, treating my life like a dig site, preserving what mattered before the collapse. Emily tried to bridge the gap one night, cooking my favorite meal, her eyes pleading. We ate in near silence, the clink of forks deafening. "I miss us," she said finally, her voice breaking. I looked at her, saw the weight she carried, and felt nothing but cold. "Me too," I said, because it was true, but not in the way she wanted. I missed who we were, not who we'd become. After dinner, I checked her phone while she slept. A new message from Elliot. "We need to end this." I deleted it, my heart steady. They were breaking, and I was the fault line. February's chill matched the frost in my soul. I was a machine now, my days split between work and vengeance. The museum felt like a sanctuary, its artifacts unchanging, unlike my life. I'd sit among them, tracing their cracks, and think about how Emily and Elliot had cracked me. But I wasn't shattered, not yet. I was reshaping myself, forging something harder, and they'd feel it soon. My journal was a blueprint now, each entry a step toward their ruin. Elliot's career was in freefall. The university hadn't renewed his contract, citing budget concerns, but I knew my emails had tipped the scales. He'd taken to posting cryptic quotes online, about betrayal, about resilience, but his audience was shrinking. I went further, targeting his future. He'd applied for a teaching gig in Chicago. I found the listing and sent the hiring committee a package. Anonymous, of course. It included his plagiarized slide, a curated list of concerns from his time in Portland, and a subtle nudge about his personal life. I didn't expect a reply, but a week later, his application was quietly closed. I felt no joy, only progress. His personal life was next. I'd learned his mother's hospice had a volunteer program, and I signed up under a false name, attending once to gauge the staff. They were kind, overworked, and loose with information. I mentioned Elliot casually, said I was a friend, and got a sympathetic earful. His visits were rare, his calls sporadic. I didn't push, but I left a note for his mother, vague and unsigned. "Your son's choices hurt others." I knew she'd mention it to him, knew it would gnaw at him. Family was his weak spot, and I pressed it without remorse. Emily was a puzzle I hadn't solved. Hurting her directly still felt wrong, like betraying the vows I'd made. Instead, I tightened the screws indirectly. I'd hacked into her social media, not to post but to watch. She'd stopped sharing much, But her private messages were raw, venting to friends about feeling lost, never mentioning Elliot but circling him. I sent one friend a forged message from Emily's account, canceling a planned lunch with an excuse about needing space. The friend stopped reaching out and Emily's isolation grew. I watched her check her phone, confused, and felt a grim satisfaction. I upped the psychological pressure. I'd leave her office door ajar, her papers slightly askew, knowing she'd notice. Once, I placed a photo of us, our honeymoon laughing on a beach, face down on her desk. She found it, stared at it, then put it back without a word. I started mentioning old memories at random, ones tied to our early days, and watched her flinch. "Remember when we were happy?" I asked once, my tone light. She nodded, her eyes distant, and changed the subject. I was chipping away at her, piece by piece. Carl's final report was a bombshell. He'd followed Elliot to a bar where he'd met another woman, not Emily. They talked for hours, their body language close. Carl's photos showed her laughing, touching his arm, the same gestures Emily used. I wasn't surprised, but it shifted something in me. Elliot wasn't just hers, he was a pattern, a predator. It made my next move clearer. I sent Emily an anonymous email, a burner account, with a single photo of Elliot and the new woman. No text, just the image. I watched her read it the next day, her face paling, and knew I'd hit my mark. That night, she didn't come home until midnight. I didn't ask where she'd been. I didn't need to. Her eyes were red, her voice flat when she said she'd been out walking. I nodded, offered her wine, and watched her drink alone. My plan was working, but it wasn't enough. I wanted them to feel what I felt. Not just loss, but annihilation. I sat in my study, the photos spread before me, and sketched my next move. It was bolder, riskier, but I was ready. They'd built their world on lies, and I'd tear it down, brick by brick. March arrived, raw and restless, and I felt the end approaching. I wasn't the man I'd been, not the husband, not the scholar, not even the victim. I was something else, a force shaped by their choices, and I was done waiting. The evidence was overwhelming now, a mountain I'd built from fragments. Carl's reports, the recordings, the photos, her unsent emails, his crumbling career. It was time to act, to make them face what they'd done. But I wouldn't confront them directly, not yet. I wanted them to unravel first, to taste their own poison. Elliot was my primary target. He was weaker, more exposed, his life already buckling under my pressure. I'd learned he was pitching a new book, a memoir about redemption. The irony made me laugh, a sound I barely recognized. I contacted his agent, posing as a rival publisher scout, and requested a sample chapter. It arrived, earnest and self-aggrandizing, perfect for sabotage. I leaked it to a niche literary forum, edited just enough to make it sound derivative, and watched the critics pounce. His agent dropped him within days, citing reputational risks. I saw his panic online, his posts dark and scattered, and felt the ground shift beneath him. His family was next. His sister had started asking questions, thanks to my nudges, and I amplified them. I sent her another anonymous package, photos of Elliot with the new woman, paired with older shots of him and Emily. I included a note. "He's not who you think." She didn't reply, but her social media went silent, her usual chatter gone. I knew she'd confronted him, knew it would fracture their bond. His mother's hospice called him, too. I'd overheard a nurse mention it during my volunteer shift. He was alone now, just as I'd been, and I wasn't done. Emily was slipping faster than I'd expected. The photo of Elliot with the other woman had broken something in her. She'd stopped hiding her distress, her face drawn, her movements sluggish. I kept up the pressure, subtle but relentless. I'd leave voicemails from unknown numbers, hanging up after a single ring. I'd move her keys, her glasses, then find them in odd places. A drawer, a shelf. She'd laugh it off, but her eyes were wild, searching mine for answers I wouldn't give. I started mentioning Elliot casually, testing her. Heard that lecturer's leaving soon. She'd freeze, mumble something vague, and change the topic. I hacked her second phone again, reading their texts. They were sparse now, laced with distrust. "Who's she?" Emily had written, and he'd replied, "No one, you're paranoid." I smiled, deleted his response, and sent one from her. "We're done." He didn't write back, but I knew it landed like a bomb. She checked her phone obsessively that night, her fingers shaking, and I pretended not to notice. I was rewriting their story, turning their connection into ash, and it felt right, clean, almost holy. I met with Carl one last time, over coffee in a diner far from home. He handed me a final envelope. Proof they'd met once more. A desperate lunch where they'd barely spoken. "They're done," he said, his voice flat. I nodded, paid him, and burned the envelope later. I didn't need it anymore. I had everything. I spent that night in my study, laying out my plan's final phase. It wasn't enough to ruin them separately. I wanted them to see each other's fall, to know I'd orchestrated it. I sketched a public reveal, something undeniable, but I wasn't sure of the shape yet. Emily tried to reach me one evening, her voice soft, almost broken. "Can we talk?" she asked, standing in my doorway. I looked at her, saw the weight of her choices, and felt nothing but distance. "Sure," I said, but my tone was cold. She hesitated, then left, and I heard her cry later, muffled through the walls. I didn't go to her. Couldn't. She'd chosen this path, and I was her consequence. The reckoning was coming, and I'd make sure they both felt it. Spring whispered at the edges of March, but I felt no renewal. I was a man on a mission, my life reduced to a single purpose: to make Emily and Elliot pay. The museum, once my refuge, was now a distraction, its artifacts irrelevant compared to the ruin I was crafting. I'd spent months building my case, and now it was time to wield it. I didn't want apologies or explanations. I wanted them to feel the weight of their betrayal, to see their worlds collapse under my hand. Elliot was first. He was barely holding on, his career in tatters, his family distant. I'd learned he was planning to leave Portland, a last-ditch move to escape the mess I'd made. Couldn't let him slip away. I created a public blog, anonymous but polished, titled "The Cost of Ambition." It detailed his fall, plagiarism allegations, professional misconduct, personal failures, without naming him outright. I used enough specifics to make it clear, linking to real events, real consequences. I seeded it on literary forums, sent it to his former colleagues, his agents' contacts. It spread slowly, then caught fire, shared by those who'd already doubted him. The blog was my masterpiece, a scalpel disguised as gossip. It didn't just attack his work, it questioned his character, his integrity. I included a veiled reference to a married woman, enough to sting Emily if she saw it. She did, I think. Her face was gray the next morning, her hands unsteady as she scrolled her phone. The university's alumni network picked it up, and by week's end, Elliot's name was poison. He posted a frantic denial online, calling it slander, but it only drew more eyes. I watched from my study, refreshing the page, and felt a hollow triumph. Emily was next, and she was harder. I still loved her in some twisted way, and that made my actions heavier. I didn't want to destroy her outright. I wanted her to see what she'd lost, to live with it. I started with her poetry, her pride. She'd submitted a collection to a prestigious journal, a chance at recognition. I sent an anonymous tip to the editors, claiming her work echoed an obscure poet style, attaching doctored samples to prove it. It wasn't true, but it was plausible, and they withdrew her submission, pending review. She didn't tell me, but I saw the rejection letter on her desk, her handwriting scrawled in the margins. Why? I tightened her isolation. I'd befriended her closest colleague, Lisa, under the guise of planning a surprise for Emily. I fed Lisa half-truths, Emily's distance, her secrets, until Lisa pulled back, confused and hurt. Emily noticed, asked me if I'd spoken to her, and I lied smoothly, said no. Her world was shrinking to just me, and I made sure I was a stranger. I'd leave for hours without explanation, return with a smile, and watch her wrestle with questions she wouldn't ask. Her second phone was silent now, abandoned in a drawer, and I knew Elliot was gone from her life. The final blow was public, deliberate. I rented a small gallery space, claiming it was for a museum event. Instead, I turned it into a stage. I printed the photos, her with Elliot, him with the other woman, blown up but blurred, artistic enough to pass as decor. I added quotes from her unsent emails, his texts, stripped of context. I'm scared, but I can't stop. You make me feel alive. I invited their circles, her colleagues, his former students, mutual friends, under the pretense of a poetry reading. Emily thought she was performing. Elliot thought he was a guest. The night was set. I stood in the shadows, watching them arrive separately, their faces tight with unease. The room buzzed with whispers as people noticed the photos, the words. Emily froze, her eyes darting to me, then away. Elliot's jaw tightened, his hands clenched. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The truth was there, hanging in the air, and I let it choke them. They'd see each other's ruin, and they'd know I'd built it. This was my revenge, and it was only the beginning. The gallery hummed with tension, a low buzz that felt like static in my veins. I stood near the back, half hidden by a pillar, watching Emily and Elliot navigate the trap I'd set. The space was intimate, softly lit, with my curated display lining the walls. Blurred photos of their stolen moments, fragments of their words floating like accusations. Guests mingled, sipping wine, their murmurs growing sharper as they pieced together the exhibit's meaning. I planned every detail, from the guest list to the playlist, jazz, her favorite, now a cruel echo. This wasn't just a reveal. It was a reckoning, and I was its architect. Emily arrived first, her face composed but her eyes wary. She wore a navy dress, one I'd once loved, and it struck me how beautiful she still was, even now. She thought she was here to read her poetry, a lie I'd fed her weeks ago. I watched her scan the room, pausing at the photos, her breath catching as she recognized herself in the grainy shapes. She didn't approach them, didn't dare, but I saw her hands tremble, clutching her notebook like a shield. She glanced at me once, a fleeting look that held fear and something else. Regret, maybe. I met her gaze, my face blank, and turned away. Elliot came late, his coat damp from the drizzle outside. He looked diminished, his charm eroded by months of my sabotage. His eyes darted to the walls, and I saw the moment he understood. His jaw tightened, his shoulders slumped. He spotted Emily across the room, and for a second, their gazes locked, a silent storm passing between them. Neither moved toward the other. Good. I wanted them apart, forced to face this alone. The crowd was noticing now, whispers spreading like ripples. Is that her? Who's he with? I stayed still, letting the questions do their work. I'd hired a host, a neutral voice to guide the evening, someone who knew nothing of my intent. She welcomed everyone, called it an exploration of truth in art, a vague phrase I'd fed her. Then she invited Emily to read. Emily hesitated, her face pale, but pride or defiance pushed her forward. She stood at the podium, her voice unsteady as she began a poem about loss, her words faltering when she glanced at the walls. The crowd listened, but their eyes were on the photos, the quotes. I shouldn't, but I want to. I saw her notice it midline, her voice breaking. She stopped, apologized, and sat down, her hands covering her face. Elliot didn't stay long. He lingered near the door, his face a mask of anger and shame, then left without a word. I followed him outside, keeping my distance, and watched him slump against his car, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. The rain streaked his face, and I felt a flicker of something. Pity? No, satisfaction. He'd built this as much as I had. I returned to the gallery, where Emily was still seated, staring at nothing. Guests were leaving now, their voices hushed, some throwing her sympathetic looks, others judgmental. I didn't care what they thought. This was for me, for her, for him. I approached her finally, my steps deliberate. You okay? I asked, my voice low, neutral. She looked up, her eyes red, searching mine for the truth. Did you do this? She whispered, barely audible. I didn't answer, just held her gaze until she looked away. I offered to drive her home, and she nodded, silent. In the car, the air was thick, her breathing uneven. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The gallery had said everything, and she'd heard it loud and clear. I'd torn their world apart, and now they'd live with the pieces. The days after the gallery were a void, heavy and disorienting. Emily barely spoke, moving through the house like she was underwater, her eyes dull. I'd expected rage, tears, something to match the fire in me, but she was quiet, folded in on herself. It unnerved me, the stillness, but I refused to soften. She'd made her choices, and I'd made mine. The photos were gone, the blog deleted, the gallery's rental ended. My tracks covered, but the damage done. I'd won, hadn't I? Yet the victory felt hollow, a weight I carried alone. I checked on Elliot through my usual channels, though I'd scaled back. He'd left Portland, or so it seemed. His apartment was listed for rent, his social media dormant. I found a post from his sister, a vague mention of family struggles, and knew I'd hit deeper than I'd planned. Part of me wanted to keep pushing, to ensure he'd never recover, but the gallery had been enough. He was gone, his name tainted, his life fractured. I turned my focus to Emily, to us, to what was left. I didn't know if I wanted to salvage it or burn it down, but I needed to decide. Emily tried to talk once, sitting across from me at breakfast. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice raw, the first crack in her silence. I looked at her, saw the woman I'd loved, and felt nothing but distance. "For what?" I asked, testing her. She faltered, her hands twisting in her lap. "For everything." It wasn't enough, not nearly, but I didn't push. I nodded, sipped my coffee, and let the moment die. I wasn't ready to hear her, not yet, maybe not ever. My journal lay closed now, its purpose fulfilled, but I kept it close, a reminder of what I'd done. I started noticing changes in her, small but telling. She'd stopped writing, her notebooks untouched on her desk. She'd call in sick to the university, her voice flat when she spoke to colleagues. Once I overheard her on the phone with Lisa trying to explain, but Lisa was cold, distant. My work, I knew. Emily's world was smaller now, her connections frayed, and I watched it happen without remorse. I'd wanted her to feel what I felt, and she did. But seeing it up close, her slow collapse, stirred something in me. Guilt, maybe, or the ghost of love. I kept up appearances, going to work, smiling at colleagues, but I was unraveling too. The museum felt empty, its artifacts mocking my obsession. I'd spent months chasing revenge, and now that I had it, I didn't know what came next. I'd look at Emily, see her hollowed eyes, and wonder if I'd gone too far. Not for Elliot, he deserved it, but for her, for us. I started questioning my choices, replaying the gallery, the emails, the lies. Had I become the monster? The thought gnawed at me, but I pushed it down. She'd started this, not me. I checked her second phone one last time, out of habit more than need. It was dead, its battery drained, but I powered it up. No new messages, just old ones from Elliot, pleading, then silent. I deleted them all, wiped the phone, and buried it in a drawer. It was over, I told myself. But it wasn't, not really. The house felt like a battlefield, its silence louder than any fight. I'd torn them apart, but I hadn't rebuilt anything in its place. I sat in my study, staring at our wedding photo, and wondered what I'd lost in winning. Emily left a note one morning, short and shaky. "I need time." She was gone when I got home, her suitcase missing, her closet half empty. I didn't panic, didn't chase her. I sat on the couch, the house too big, and felt the weight of my choices. I'd wanted her to hurt, and she did. I'd wanted control, and I had it. But now, alone, I saw the cost. Revenge had been my fire, but it had burned me too, and I wasn't sure what was left. Emily's absence was a presence, filling the house with echoes. I walked through rooms that felt foreign, touching her things, her scarf, her mug, a half-read book, and felt like an intruder. She'd been gone a week, no word, no hint of where she'd fled. I didn't call her sister, didn't check her accounts. I let her go, not out of kindness but exhaustion. I'd spent so long pulling strings, I didn't know how to stop. But now there was nothing left to manipulate. Just me and the mess I'd made. Work was a blur. Colleagues noticed my distraction, asked if I was okay, and I lied, said I was fine. I'd sit in my office, surrounded by artifacts, and think about how they'd outlasted their makers. Kings, scribes, lovers, all dust. I'd wanted to be different, to carve something permanent, but all I'd done was destroy. Emily's face haunted me, not the gallery's version but the one from years ago, laughing in our garden, her hands dirty from planting. I'd erased that woman, hadn't I? Or had she erased herself? I started drinking more, not heavily, but enough to dull the edges. Nights were the worst, the house too quiet, my thoughts too loud. I'd replay the gallery, see her trembling at the podium, Elliot slinking away. I'd won, but what? I pulled out my journal, read its pages, and saw a stranger's hand. Methodical, cruel, relentless. I didn't regret Elliot's fall. He'd earned it. But Emily, I'd loved her, even as I'd hurt her, and that contradiction was tearing me apart. I burned a page, then another, but stopped short of the whole book. It was proof not just of them, but of me. I tracked Elliot one last time out of habit. He was in Seattle, crashing with his sister, her posts guarded but clear, helping family through tough times. I didn't dig further. I'd broken him enough, his career, his name, his ties. He wasn't my focus anymore. I thought about Emily, wondered where she was, what she was feeling. Was she writing again? Or had I taken that too? I imagined her in a motel, staring at a blank page, and felt a pang I couldn't name. I'd wanted her to hurt, but now I wasn't sure why. I cleaned the house, a strange compulsion. I packed her books, her clothes, not to erase her but to understand her absence. I found a poem in her desk, unfinished, about a bird trapped in a storm. It was raw, beautiful, and it cut me deeper than any photo. I sat there, reading it again, and saw her pain. Not just from me, but from herself, from Elliot, from choices she couldn't undo. I folded it carefully, kept it, though I didn't know why. It was hers, and maybe I still wanted a piece of her, even now. I met with my lawyer again, not for divorce but for clarity. What do I do if she comes back? I asked. He shrugged, said it depended on what I wanted. I didn't know. I'd spent so long chasing revenge, I'd forgotten how to live without it. I drove by the university, saw her office dark, and felt a pull to go inside, to sit in her chair, to remember. I didn't. I drove home instead, the city blurring past, and sat in the garden, her rosemary still thriving. It was the only thing that hadn't changed. I started writing, not a journal but letters I'd never send. To Emily, to Elliot, to myself. They were messy, full of rage and grief and questions I couldn't answer. Why did you do it? I wrote to her. Why did I? To myself. I didn't expect replies, but the act of writing grounded me, gave me something to hold on to. The house was still empty, but I was starting to see it as mine, not ours. I wasn't healed, not close, but I was moving, and that was enough for now. April came, and with it, Emily. I found her on the porch one evening, her suitcase at her feet, her face thinner than I remembered. She didn't knock, just sat there, staring at the door like it might open itself. I saw her through the window, and my heart lurched. Anger, love, fear, all at once. I didn't know what I'd say, what I'd feel, but I opened the door anyway. Hey, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. She looked up, her eyes tired, and nodded. Can I come in? She asked, and I stepped aside. We sat in the living room, the silence thick. I didn't offer coffee, didn't ask where she'd been. She looked around, noticing the changes. Her books gone, the space emptier, and flinched, but said nothing. Finally, she spoke, her voice low. I messed up. I know that. I waited, letting her words hang. It's over, she said, meaning Elliot, I assumed. It's been over. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I wanted to ask why, how, but the answers didn't matter anymore. The truth was in her absence, in the gallery, in me. She talked more, haltingly, about guilt, about losing herself. She didn't mention the gallery, didn't accuse me, though I knew she knew. I listened, my hands clasped, my face unreadable. Part of me wanted to scream, to throw her out, but another part, the part that remembered our Sundays, our laughter, wanted to hear her. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said, her eyes meeting mine. I just needed to say it. I nodded again, the weight of her words settling like dust. Okay, I said, and that was all. She stayed that night, in the guest room at my insistence. I didn't sleep, just lay there, listening to the house creak, wondering what this meant. Did I want her back? Could I? I thought about the gallery, the photos, the pain I'd caused. I'd hurt her as much as she'd hurt me, maybe more, and that balance felt wrong now. I got up at dawn, made coffee, and found her in the kitchen, staring at the garden. It's still alive, she said, meaning the rosemary. Yeah, I replied, and for a moment we were just us, no lies, no revenge. We talked more over the next days, cautiously, like strangers learning each other. She told me she'd been with her sister, trying to write, failing mostly. She didn't ask about my months, and I didn't offer. I didn't tell her about Carl, the blog, the letters I'd burned. Some things were mine alone. I noticed her trying, small gestures, like cooking breakfast, leaving notes, but I kept my distance. Trust was a ruin, and I wasn't ready to rebuild. Not yet, maybe not ever. I started seeing her differently, not as the enemy but as someone broken, like me. She'd lost her spark, her poems, her place in the world, and I'd had a hand in that. I didn't apologize, didn't confess, but I felt the weight of my choices heavier now. I wondered if we could coexist, not as husband and wife but as survivors of the same storm. I didn't know, but I let her stay, let her try, because walking away felt too final, and I wasn't ready for that either. I wrote one last letter to myself this time. You did what you thought you had to, I wrote. Now live with it. I didn't burn it, just tucked it away. Emily was in the garden, pruning the rosemary, her hands steady. I watched her, felt the past and present collide, and wondered what came next. We were here, together, but not whole. Maybe that was enough for now. Spring deepened, and the house felt less like a tomb. Emily and I were navigating something new. Not love, not yet, but a fragile truce. We didn't talk about Elliot, the gallery, or the months apart, but their shadows lingered, shaping our silences. I'd catch her writing again, small scraps of poetry on napkins, and feel a flicker of hope, not for us but for her. She was finding herself slowly, and I was trying to find me. We were separate but together, and that was its own kind of progress. I went back to the museum with purpose, not just routine. I'd been offered a project in Greece, a dig that could last months. I hadn't decided, but the idea of leaving, of breathing air that wasn't hers, was tempting. I told Emily about it one night, over dinner, and she listened, her face calm. "You should go," she said, and I saw she meant it. Not to push me away, but to give me space, maybe herself too. I nodded, didn't commit, but felt the possibility settle in me. I stopped checking on Elliot, let his ghost fade. I heard through a colleague he'd moved east, teaching at a small college, starting over. I didn't care. He was a chapter closed, his ruin complete. My focus was here, now, Emily, me, the life we might build or leave behind. We started small, sharing coffee, walking the garden, talking about books, not feelings. It wasn't the past, but it was something, and I held onto it, cautious but present. I unpacked her books one day, put them back on the shelves, not as a promise but a gesture. She noticed, smiled, and didn't comment. I saw her reading one later, her fingers tracing the pages, and felt a warmth I hadn't in months. We weren't healed, weren't whole, but we were trying, and that was more than I'd expected. I thought about the gallery, my revenge, and saw it for what it was, necessary then, but not now. I'd let it go, not for her, but for me. I wrote no more letters, burned no more pages. My journal stayed locked, a relic of a war I'd fought and left. I started sketching instead, artifacts mostly, but sometimes the garden, her hands in the dirt. It wasn't art, just a way to see the world again, not through pain but possibility. Emily noticed, asked to see one, and I showed her. A rosemary sprig, rough but honest. She smiled, said it was good, and I believed her. We sat in the garden one evening, the air warm, the city alive beyond our fence. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice soft. I looked at her, saw the woman I'd loved, the one I'd hurt, the one still here. "We live," I said, and meant it. Not together, not apart, but forward, whatever that looked like. She nodded, her hand brushing mine, and we stayed there, watching the dusk. No answers, but enough questions to keep going. I thought about Greece again, about staying, about her. I didn't know what I'd choose, but I knew I could. Revenge had been my cage, and I'd unlocked it. Not with forgiveness, but with time. Emily was writing again, her notebook full, and I was sketching, my hands steady. The house wasn't ours yet, but it was a start, and I'd take it. We'd hurt each other, broken each other, but we were here, breathing, and that was enough. For now, it was enough.